Hello, Silas here, and I'm back with my friend Steven. Say what's up to the peoples.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say that Kevin, for those who don't know, Kevin Samuels recently passed away. I wanted to give a quick mention of that just because I figured sort of relevant to this topic. He was a bit of an influence on me, and he'll be greatly missed. So rest in peace.
Yeah, so Steven's starting off with that depressing, depressing ass note. They were just in your
Before I
conversation,
forget,
and just go
yeah.
away. But no, I'm kidding. I second that. Like I listened to some of the Kevin Samuel stuff, and Steven is saying this is related to this because this is "Marry Him." It's a series that we're talking about. We're reading. Steven read a book, and he's going over the book and telling us about it, and we're having a conversation back and forth. I think it is the eighth part of this series. You can find a lot more on it. So tell us, Stephen, just a little quick thing about how you found this book and why we're reading it.
Sure. So I was listening to a show I've liked called The Roommates, and the author, Lori Gottlieb, was one of the guest stars. I really had liked what she was saying. They were basically talking about dating in general, and she was explaining how she had written this book because it was a combination of a personal odyssey, but also pointing out some of the trends that exist currently within dating. But it's the book, I mean, you can tell is focused more on women, but I think a lot of the trends apply universally. And I liked a lot of the things that she was saying, so I thought, why not read the book and see what else she had to say? And the book, very well cited. She cites a lot of her own experience, but she also interviews different experts on marriage, relationships, dating, etc.
Yeah, and we've been in different kind of spheres, manosphere, different things in that side. There's been a lot of talk about that, looking more at the dating meta, like the current interactions between dating. And one thing I've been thinking for some time, not just because I traveled around and moved to different countries and continents and things like that, where there's some different dynamics going on between what's desirable or how you approach women and girls and just men act and expectations and things like that. But when it comes down to it, we live in a time with this unprecedented choice and the ability to select and the access to potential mates is just exponentially grown, even compared to the time of most of um, our parents. So even if our parents, some of you probably might have parents who have talked to you more about this, but even if they're talking to you, it's just completely gone. Even not even just your parents. I'm just looking at the dating meta from like when I was a teen in high school. Then when I got to college, to like now, it's just completely changed with like the apps and the things like this and the ability to move around and just the signals and just it can be a situation where you have paralysis by what's that thing where you have like too many choices?
Um, Information paralysis. There's
Yeah, it could be
also
something like
the
that.
paradox of choice. I think that actually comes up in here, where it's
Okay,
like
cool.
you have all these choices, but then you just end up getting confused because you're not sure which is the best. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that, and then when it comes down to it, also when you're moving around and you're living in these different places, very cosmopolitan places, there's a lot of different cultural signals. You growing up have seen one thing from your parents. You might like what happened with your parents. You might dislike what happened by your parents, but that's one signal that you've seen. And then to find someone else that matches that is kind of tough. You have people who when you're just at work, when you're just at school, you're intermingling in a certain way. But then when it comes to getting to that serious sort of relationship, and this book is mostly for people who are interested in monogamous relationships to get coupled up and in general, mostly to have kids, because that structure of marriage was something that was sociopolitically developed in order to have a strong environment for marriage. Primarily, actually, I mean, it's not primarily. It's a give and take. There's positives for both the men and the women involved in it, or women, men involved in it. But just a typical cis het type of relationship, it was a situation where the woman would say, in my time of fertility, in my time where I'm younger, I have all this amazing ability to have children. I'm going to give that to this man, and this man's going to dedicate himself to me. So, when I get older and he gets older and he starts earning more, he's going to stay with me. We're going to stay together to give our children a stable sort of environment. And we also have the shared community that this is more of like a promise in front of the community. And then the community says, okay, these people are coming up. They're going to bring a new life into this community, or them together are a unit. They work in a different way, and somebody carries the weight of this thing, somebody supports in this kind of situation. So we're going to bring that person into the community and support them because they're also going to give back. So there's that whole thing that comes between that. But then you have all these different signals of somebody from India, you might meet them in high school or college and you might get along well, but then when it comes to getting married, they're thinking about all these Indian type of ideas. Yet you're from like a small town in Ohio and you have these other ideas of small town Ohio, and then how is that going to mix up? How is that necessarily going to mesh? And you have some issues just with the actual getting married, let alone all the process coming to that point where people are saying, oh, you don't need to get married earlier. Why are you getting married early? Women empowerment, do all these things, go all this way. Or the men being like, oh, the women have to be super subservient. You have to be the person who earns this amount of money before you get somebody who's doing this. And those roles are just, even if they ever actually did exist, for them to really apply in current timeline is very difficult and it's a mess. And people like Kevin Samuels have been helping. I think he was kind of a bit unique because he was a man, mostly having women call into his show, even though I think mostly men were watching that. But you have mostly, it's like men talking about stuff to men, about issues men are dealing with, and you have women talking to women about issues women are dealing with. And then one good thing we saw this book is like a lot of the things that she's talking about are things that I'd seen men talk about, because even though you have those two different groups talking about things, they're still talking about the primary thing of relationships, which is between men and women. Even if it's men and men, women and women, there's still certain roles and things like that that we found familiar, and I think I've enjoyed this series so far.
Well, also with Samuels, he focused more on the black population, which has a different series of issues because we can talk about the impact of the welfare state, single motherhood, the how many black men are single and childless versus only a small percentage were fathering the children. A lot of dynamics that have created a lot of problems, and I think people like him were starting to push back against some of that. And hopefully other people will carry that torch as well with him gone. But I think he and others are starting some very important conversations on this stuff.
Yeah. So with this one, what we do this series, we've done a lot more in the intro. We're talking about things back and forth, and then before we get into it. But I think I'm just going to read what they say here. It's like a short info about the book, and then we'll get into it where Stephen will just read an excerpt from the book, and then we'll discuss the book and just go through it in this chapter that we're at. So this is what they say about the book. The book is Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough by Lori Gottlieb. An eye-opening, funny, and painful, and always truthful in-depth examination of modern relationships and a wake-up call for single women about getting real about Mr. Right. You have a fulfilling job, great friends, and the perfect apartment. So what if you haven't found the one just yet? He'll come along someday, right? But what if he doesn't? What if Mr. Right had been, well, Mr. Right in front of you, but you passed him by? Nearing 40 and single, journalist Lori Gottlieb started to wonder, what makes for lasting romantic fulfillment? And are we looking for those qualities when we are dating? Are we too picky about trivial things that don't matter, and not picky enough about the often overlooked things that do? In Marry Him, Gottlieb explores an all too common dilemma: how to reconcile the desire for a happy marriage with a list of must-haves and deal breakers so long and complicated that many great guys get misguidedly eliminated. On a quest to find the answer, Gottlieb sets out on her journey in search of love, discovering wisdom and surprising insights from sociologists and neurobiologists, marital researchers, and behavioral economists, as well as single and married men and women of all generations.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else with the little intro?
No, that about sums it up. I figured just jump right in. All right.
Yeah, so that's it. And it says here again with the list of the marriage, and I think there's too many people asking where have the good men gone, and she's saying like find the good men that you see, like find the good in the men that you see, finding the good in the men that might have gone. I think that's kind of a might be a sub. I might write that as a title for the sub. Oh, yeah, because where have the good men gone? Then this book is about finding the good in men that might have gone, or that you might otherwise.
You might have written off otherwise, I would say.
Yeah. So tell us the name of this chapter and then get into it.
All right. So this is chapter 9. It's called "It's Not Him, It's You." Yeah. All right. So if you remember in the last chapter, she was talking about her first meeting with the dating coach Evan, and how her meeting with him went. This is just talking about standards and how they relate. They're a reflection of what you want, and they can also hold you back because your standards are unrealistic. Okay. So she's sitting at her computer, trying to pick out the guys unmatched. That was what the last chapter was about. and her friend Lisa called, asked what she was up to. She said she was trying Evan's assignments. She suggested she try it too. Lisa, who's 35 and single grown, she said it sounded like a good plan, but she was burned out with online dating and even dating in general. She didn't want to talk about dating. Um, but it just made her more panicked about being single. She said, let's talk about movies, books, global warming, the latest episode of Weeds, Anything But Men. And she's like, how different was this from 2 years earlier when Lisa was 33 and all she wanted to talk about was men, or rather one man, her boyfriend. She had been dating Ryan for a year. He was the 33-year-old lawyer and she was smitten. They had a lot of fun together. They seemed to share the same goals and they seemed compatible as friends and lovers. In fact, Ryan had been making comments about marriage, but something didn't feel right. He just doesn't fuss over me, Lisa said towards the end of the first year together. It's not the way I'm used to being treated in a relationship. At the time, I completely understood what she meant. She didn't feel adored by her boyfriend. He told her that he loved her, but he never said that he was the luckiest guy in the world to have found her. He said she was pretty, but not the most beautiful woman he ever met. He brought her Tylenol when she had the flu, but not flowers for no reason. He was consistently sweet and loving towards her, but wasn't demonstrative. He didn't put her on a pedestal the way other boyfriends had. Never mind that she didn't put him on a pedestal either. That was the guy's role. He was supposed to court her, right? One day after another marriage comment, Lisa shared her doubts, said, I just don't feel that you're totally in love with me. He said, but I am. He couldn't understand why she felt that way, and Lisa couldn't explain it. It was just a feeling. But one she couldn't let go of. Each time she brought it up, he would seem perplexed. She would feel rejected. He would then attempt all kinds of romantic gestures, leaving a chocolate kiss with a note on her pillow in the morning, calling in the middle of the day. Lisa was charmed. I want him to want to do these things, she said, but now he's only doing them because I asked him. Um, Still, Lisa tried to feel reassured because of the gestures felt forced. It was sweet to make the effort. But then 2 months later, Lisa and Ryan were at an engagement party, and the groom to be said in a toast to his bride to be that he could never love anyone as much as he loved her. That got Lisa thinking. When she and Ryan were in the car on the way home, she asked him a question. If something happened to me and I died young, do you think you could love another woman as much as you love me? He thought about it for a minute. He said, well, it would be different from the love I have for you. Different as in you loved me more, Lisa asked. Different as in different, her boyfriend said. As he reached for her hand, he asked, why does it matter? I want to be with you, not some hypothetical other woman. I don't want to think about you dying. I love you. It would be hard to meet someone I love as much, but if I died, I'd expect that you'd fall in love again, and it would be different from our relationship, but that you'd go on and live your life. 3 weeks later, Lisa broke up with him. I wanted him to be absolutely crazy about me, Lisa said now 2 years later. The fact that he could imagine loving another woman as much meant to me that I wasn't the love of his life. I wanted him to say, I could imagine getting remarried, but I would never love anyone as much as you. I asked Lisa what would happen if the hypothetical situation were reversed. If she had married Ryan, he died young, could she imagine falling in love again? There was a long pause. Yeah, she admitted, I think I know intellectually at least you can fully love more than one person in your lifetime, but in my heart, I want a guy to feel that way about me and only me anyway. At the time, I had backed her up completely. Now, though, as I thought about that, what Evan called my unreasonable expectations, when I clicked through online profiles, suddenly I felt that Lisa was being unreasonable too. And yet, in other areas of our lives, we were considered generally reasonable people. So, what was going on? All right, end of that section. Thoughts and comments? Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, first with this series, I know with some MANversation, and I would be very excited if, first of all, guys, gals, everyone else in between, everyone, welcome. Thanks for listening. Thank y'all. If anyone have any comments you want to say wherever you're listening to this, let us know. But I am seriously very interested in what women are thinking. Like, how indicative is this of women? Like when they want something like romance. I understand. I think even the most, in general, even the typically progressive, current timeline, independent sort of women, when it comes to relationships, they still hold on to at least the traditional aspect of the man being the initiator of the romantic actual things, the gestures. It's still the men who are proposing and the women who are disposing. That's a typical thing. You look at most of the apps and things like that. Very few women would be like, I like this guy. I'm going to ask him out. I'm going to actually plan the date. Even if it's not paying but it's all that stuff. They're going to just sit back and say, okay, maybe I'll do like a Bumble where somebody can say hi to me or express interest, look my way, and then I'll initiate that initial interest back. The guy shouldn't come and speak to me unless I walk up to him and speak to him. But from there, that's as far as I think most of them go. Once they actually, let's say they say, okay, I'll decide if we even attempt. Once that attempt has been opened, most of them still fall back and say, it's still mostly the man who has to initiate this thing. So I don't necessarily know, because that's weird. And like you see, even she said like she completely agreed with her. I don't know how much thought Lori had put into it back then
Yeah.
when she supported her, or like what really changed so much. And this is some things we don't know. Sometimes something is right in front of us. Like this whole book is saying maybe it was right in front of you the whole time that you didn't see it. And for whatever reason, you're seeing a thing a certain way, and then something just drops and changes, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I can't believe I was thinking this way. It's strange. I don't know. Do you
Well,
know
I
anyone
was
who's thought something like this? Because that's weird.
I don't know someone who's thought this exactly, but I was thinking of the comparison to sort of my work history. And I remember like one of my first jobs, a guy said to me, if you're replaceable, so is the job. And I think that's kind of a good standard to have here. It's like, if it's like, oh, I want you to act like I'm irreplaceable. Okay, would you find someone if I'm gone? Well, yeah, it's like, okay, well, why doesn't it go the other way too? And then it's like, you have to make the case, what do I bring to the table that gives me so much leverage in this situation? And well, like, I mean, we don't know her friend personally, but it seems like, I mean, unless you're ultra famous, wealthy, beautiful, some combination, it's like, what are you really bringing that makes you so hard to replace? And why should he put you on that pedestal? Or it's like, you just want to be idolized, Yeah.
That is true. I guess I can see it that way. I was
And the
thinking,
thing,
yeah,
well,
maybe she's
well,
based, but go ahead.
what annoys me about that well, the thing with that statement too, though, is that the other follow up is like, I've worked in places where bosses will be like, you're all replaceable. But the thing is, the people saying that's often true of them too. Like, I had a general manager who said that, but it's like, you're a general manager of like a decent restaurant, but it's like they could find someone to replace you in like a few days if they want. So I don't really get that attitude. Like it's this weird thing where it's like people will act like I'm irreplaceable, all that, but then it's like you flip it the other way, they're not really seen in that light.
And this is another question I also wonder with some people in this situation. Do they not have friends? Like
Yeah.
I've moved around, and there's friends that I've had where I really cared for them, but then I just moved to a different place, and for some reason, several reasons, we just fall apart. It's not like I hate this person anymore. And then when I meet somebody new, and they have similar some things, and they fit some needs and wants that I have at that current time, then I start a friendship with that. I don't feel like I've cheated on the friend that's gone before, because
No.
it's just part of it. So with this one, do they not love their friends and understand that you can love your friends in a certain way, but then have your partner that you love in a certain way? And then it also comes down to, what are the things, like you said, what are the things that are really unique? If somebody's like, I want somebody to have children with, 50% of the population of the world for 20 to 25 years of their lives can fit that criteria of being able to reproduce with a person. If a woman is like, I want a man who can earn $75,000, there's, in whatever given area there is, it's probably going to be 10% of the men at that given area are going to fit that criteria for 20 to 30 years of their life. So if that's the current man that they're with, and that's the main thing that they're with that man, they love about that man, one of the primary things, that's something replaceable. That's easily, that is something that you can replace. So that's something kind of practical and objective when you look at it. But then the subjective things, I think, are the things which now go into the extras that make somebody unique. Like even this, she seems to be comparing this. First of all, she's comparing to boyfriends that are gone. So I'm like, if you're comparing it to relationships that ended, then that clearly wasn't enough for you to have a relationship. So why is that something that you're comparing it for? But even him being different in that sense, where he wasn't like those previous people, should have shown where it's something like, maybe this is actually a unique kind of situation. So he's kind of going off from the other people that I knew. But it's just like I'm saying, what are those unique things where, like, if Stephen, unfortunately, not putting it, you start off with depressing, like Kevin Samuels, like, if you passed away, it would be a hole. It would be a hole in my life, but doesn't mean like I would stop having conversations that I value. I wouldn't be able to find somebody that has the same breadth of conversations specific that we've had with Stephen. Definitely won't be able to have somebody who's had this history of having these conversations on this channel, on this platform for like, what, 5 years now or something.
Yeah.
So that background and that knowing each other is kind of back and forth, that's something that might be impossible to build up again, but doesn't mean the me of that future will all of a sudden just be like, I'm never going to have conversations with people. I'll try to fill that in with other conversations and might end up valuing somebody with that situation. So like with Kevin Samuels, he's been a valuable people for people's life, but doesn't mean that they're going to be like, I'm never ever going to listen to information about dating or things again. Like, that's not going to happen. That person won't exactly be Kevin Samuels. And on top of that, the experiences that they've had, it's always going to be like, this is kind of like Kevin Samuels. Oh, this is not as good as Kevin Samuels. Oh, this is
Yeah.
a bit different for Kevin Samuels. So even if you do break up, even if like not, it's not even a breakup, this is a death. Even if somebody dies, you're still going to be like, this is still a person of in my heart. Like the person who he would fall in love with would be somebody who had you as part of that person. Like this is so weird. Like
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, I lost three of my grandparents pretty close together, and that was all sad. But at the same time, like, I'll always cherish those memories. But it's like, we're still going to go to beaches. We're still going to travel. We're still going to spend time with other relatives. I mean, you know, it's sad. I mean, I can't replace them, but it's like you're going to find meaning, connection in other ways.
yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So with the women out there, what do you think she meant by romance, and also how is saying I might be able to find somebody thinking that you can love? Ah, that's so weird. Go
All
ahead.
right, so this section too good for an ordinary relationship. Dr. Michael Broder, a Philadelphia-based psychologist who specializes in relationships, think that many women today bring a dangerous sense of entitlement to dating, wanting to be adored in that fantasy way he believes in is another unreasonable requirement on some women's already unreasonable checklist. I hear all the time, if I can't have a guy who is X, Y, or Z, I'd rather be alone. And then he says, okay, fine, be prepared to have your second choice. With that sense of entitlement, that's probably what you're going to get. For these women, he said, not only is the imagined guy a fantasy, but so is the actual relationship. After all, there's a limit to what a relationship can provide. And Dr. Broder feels that women in this frame of mind are looking for a relationship from the perspective of what the guy can do for them instead of wanting something more reciprocal. One of his patients, for instance, had said to him about her current boyfriend, why should I be with a guy who's less successful than me? I might as well be alone. He said he sees a heightened sense of entitlement that previous generations didn't have. Our mothers might have wished, but certainly didn't expect that their husbands would constantly want to please them, be attracted to them, entertain them, enjoy sharing all their interests. It would be the most charming person in the room. And so they knew that marriage involved failing health, aging, boredom, periods of stress and disconnection, annoying habits, issues with children, hardships, misunderstandings, etc. But many women today seem to be looking for an idealized spiritual union instead of a realistic marital partnership. You end up with the type of woman today who sees herself as too good for an ordinary relationship. But ask happily married women about their marriages, and they'll tell you they're pretty ordinary. So how did quote unquote ordinary become the kiss of death? Okay, thoughts and comments?
Yeah, there's a general part where hypergamy is a thing where women in
Yeah.
general are attracted to men that are higher than them. It's not just attracted; it's almost like men who are at their level or below, perceived or objectively
Yeah.
when it comes to like salary and things like that. They're actually almost invisible to most women. It's
Yeah.
there's just they just get blurrier and blurrier as they get to the same level and below perception, and it's not an unnecessary thing to imagine. It's this it started off, of course, in the evolutionary bio, like like the human behavioral psychology type of thing, where it's like a simple thing. You want men that can actually provide resources and an excess of resources that it takes to just maintain that person's life. Because just in general, they understood if I'm going to reproduce with this person, first of all, I'll be debilitated for like a good 6 months at least of my life. So I want somebody else to actually be able to provide me with resources and security. And then when we have children, I want somebody who can actually supply resources for multiple children or one children or at least two people, me and the kid or whatnot, while we're at that time of growing. Because it just encourages and just it just was a division of labor back then. You didn't really have these abilities. So now that same mindset has been selected for, it's part of our genes, it's part of what we look for. Now you have women who are like, okay, a woman is working, when they said like on average, like in cities, when you go to like white collar jobs and things like that, a unmarried woman in her 20s, in general, in office type jobs, earns actually more than the unmarried men in their 20s. So she's been working up at that point. She's been going through the typical struggle that other men are going through. She's got her apartment. She's got her like the places she goes to. She's starting to talk and see like, okay, this is a school that I like in this area and all these things. So she's achieved a sort of lifestyle of making maybe 100,000 in New York City. So of course, if she decides I'm going to actually find somebody, that mindset she has of the type of life that she wants, it makes sense that she'll want somebody to be able to at least maintain that same sort of lifestyle. But there's a weird aspect of this. Like when you add somebody into your life is going to change if that person is actually a significant thing. If your life doesn't change, that person is probably rather insignificant. But if somebody is either going to make it better or worse, but you can it's hard to add something and have things remain the same. Otherwise, have you really added anything? So I think there's something that kind of is a disconnect there that people don't really realize. And they like I don't begrudge women seeking men who earn more than they do, but also understand the more you earn, the fewer men that are going to earn at that point, and there's going to be certain give or takes that you have in there, and that's just a practicality. And I know they say whataboutism, but men in general are, like you could see from the first one, she's like, I wanted him to start doing things for me. She wasn't thinking either things that I want to start doing different in my life. She's like, I want things done for me. Now, again, this isn't every woman, but it just seems to be more typically where like if a man's like, man, I just want a wife, but I still want to be able to hang out with my boys. I still want to be able to do all my hobbies. I don't want to have to come home early and things like this. I don't have to like call back in. Like very few people would think that's an okay type of mindset to have. Yet I think you have some situations where there's an expectation for the man to do a lot more things for the woman, and the woman's like, I'm not really into some of these things.
Well, I just don't, what I don't get, and I think I said this in a previous video, but I just don't get these women or even people in general who think that a relationship is supposed to be everything. I mean, you go to a job, it's like, it's not fun every single day. You move to a new place, it's like, you know, your building is going to have problems. You know, friends don't always agree. Like, why do you think there'd be some relationship where you're happy 100% of the time? And like she says, as marriage progresses, it's like financial issues, unemployment, you know, kids get sick, kids get hurt, you know, spouses die, you get into a fight. You know, it's like, I don't see any way like how it could be fun all the time. And it's like, I don't know. It's just like, I mean, I get like, okay, maybe teenage girls, women, maybe in their early 20s, but it's like by the time you're in your 30s, like, shouldn't you have outgrown a lot of this stuff? Like, it's a very infantile view to me.
Again, this is that sad thing. Like, what are their friends like? Like Steven and I, we've selected ourselves to a point where it's like, there's things we don't have in common. There's things where we not really share that much discussion wise. We just don't really talk about those things. When we have certain discussions, I mean, we think in a certain way. We're like analyzing things, empirical data, just going on and on and on about topics. So going in the back and forth to try to be very specific about the definitions of what we're talking about is something that I think we both enjoy doing. So if we're both speaking about the same topic and then we're using the same formula to discuss it, which is 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4, that kind of situation, chances are we're going to agree on certain topics. But even when I disagree with other people, when I talk to them, I'm still approaching them in that same sort of way. So I understand there's people who see the world entirely different than I do. I understand there's pushback. I put my thoughts out there and I get people like, you're completely wrong. So I get that. And what I'm not understanding is what kind of friends do these people have? Like you're saying at the workplaces, are their workplaces just so like pro them to the point where nobody challenges them? Do they not have friends that like talk about topics where both of them just sitting there okay, I think Steve and I have many times where we're trying to figure something out, and by the end of talking about it for hours, we're just like, I still don't understand what's going on here. Like, do they not have friends where they go out and talk about things, or is it just the second is an argument, they just move out to certain topics, they just never talk of this toughness? At work, everything is just kumbaya. You can't really have like a disagreement, like, because otherwise, why would they think the person you're supposed to spend a lot of time with in such a personal way, you're not going to have not clashes, but you're not going to have at least a time where you're feeling each other out and being exchanged. It's a weird situation.
Yeah. And and there's just, I was gonna say some stuff about like the source of the highest standards, but the next session kind of gets into that, so we'll just talk about that. So this is called "Is He in My League?" Maybe it has to do with our egos. For all the talk about women suffering from low self-esteem, Dr. Browder says, take that girl power mess. Many women take that girl power message of "I'm fabulous so far, nobody's good enough." I thought about the 29-year-old acquaintance I'd set up on a date a few years ago with the guy who I told her before the date reminded me of her. He's cute and loves old movies. He's a lot like you. So she went on the date, came back insulted. How could you have said he's like me? What does that mean? You didn't tell me he was so scrawny, she explained. It's like, well, so was she. He's like, and he has that weird hair. He does, but just the year earlier, she had a purple streak in hers. I asked her what she was expecting. I guess someone more dynamic. I mean, we could talk about old movies and he was sweet, but when you said he was like me, I was expecting someone more. She trailed off, but I knew she was trying to say, do you think this guy's at my level? Well, yes, I did. And I also thought that if she could see herself accurately and not as Angelina Jolie, she might have really liked him. They were both cutish, nice, and perfectly enjoyable people, but they wouldn't blow you away with their looks or charisma when they walked into a room. They were ordinary people, like most of us. He, of course, is now engaged to someone a lot like her, but without her attitude, she, of course, is still single. The more I talked to Dr. Broder, the more I wondered if this level of self-involvement was a large part of what makes it hard to find a guy. Can it get to a point where we think we're so special, so uniquely exceptional and appealing that we lose perspective entirely? I used to think, yeah, I have high standards, but I can't help it if I have good taste. Speaking of good taste, never mind the guys I had chosen that never turned out to be so fabulous either. Our generation of women is constantly told to have high self-esteem, but it seems that the women who think the most highly of themselves are at risk of ego tripping themselves out of a romantic connection. The more highly we think of ourselves, the more critical we are of perfectly good guys. It's almost like being an Olympic judge who gives men a husband rating. Everyone starts off with a 10, and the judge deduct points for anything left and perfect. He's not funny enough, take off 2 points. He's got a unibrow, take off another point. Wouldn't a better way to be start off at 0 and giving people points for assets and kindness for assets like kindness and warmth instead? I've always mentally deducted points when deciding whether to date someone. For example, if I wanted someone smart, cute, and funny, but he turned out to be smart, cute, funny, and nerdy, I'd forget the smart, cute, and funny and focus on nerdy. I'd focus on the disappointing aspects instead of feeling lucky to have found the positive ones. That's what entitlement can do. Okay, thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Yeah, just one thing that you mentioned earlier with the Kevin Samuels talking about the Black community, how there's a high number of unmarried, childless men, even though you have the highest proportion of the demographic of single women with parents, and people wonder what is that all about, and that's because like majority of people for the majority of history have not reproduced. I think you have a situation where even going back, I think one of the earliest notifications of this actual big skew, at least gender-wise, sex-wise, was after we went from hunter-gatherers to farmers. They tested sometime where it was like 30% of the men seemed to be passing on their genes and like 70% of the women. So now that comes up to 50% of the people who are alive are passing on their genes. So that's when it become like that. Before, I think it was even like, before it might have been more equitable just because like one man couldn't get enough resources to maximize that much. So I think it might have been more like 40-60 or something like that. But this whole idea that most women think I will find somebody. It's sent for me to find somebody. I think most men also have that idea like marriage is a thing. You go to school for K through 12, you go to college, you get your job, you move to the city, you find your wife, or you find your wife in college, you get that whole American dream type of thing, that whole thing in the West. And I understand there are some aspects in there where it's like taught to bring some stability into the society, where people are worried, if you have all these like single like men without children, like this can bring up issues that can be tied up in other political. No, I don't really buy that much, especially in current timeline. But just the mentality of just thinking I have to have somebody you're guaranteed somebody will make you think if I'm guaranteed somebody will come to me anyway. There's somebody out there who's matched up at least for me. So I'll just keep holding out and that person will eventually come to me. It's not a good mindset to have, because you might be in that 40%. You might be in that 30% even back then of the women who doesn't reproduce. You might be in that 70% of the men who actually doesn't find something. But right now, I don't know how the recent figures are. Maybe if you go back to like the 90s, what was it? What do you think it was actually, the figures were? I think 60-60?
Sounds fair to me, but I mean, I'd have to look into it. Wouldn't know off the top of my head.
I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely not. It's a large cohort that never reproduces. It's a large cohort that never actually gets married. Yes, people look at the divorce figures, but even with the divorce figures in that end is people who get multiple divorces, just like there's certain people who have multiple children from the same few men going and having kids. Like if somebody's like, I got a baby daddy, I got a couple kids with two fathers, chances of those two fathers only being the parents of that mother's kids, slim to none. Chances are that father has two other kids somewhere else. So that's the kind of thing. It's a few people, a small percentage, just producing a lot more children than like you have a fewer cohort of people with like one or two kids top. So it's something that I think is leveling out, and as we work through these things, we're trying to understand different sorts of combinations. And for some people, it's not what they want at all. And that's okay. But I think it's kind of sad just figuring how you got here with all that reproduction coming from all that time, with all the chance and opportunity you have to find Mr. Good Enough or to be Mr. Good Enough for a woman. Don't think you have to be like, it's also something to me myself. Don't think you have to get to that complete alpha top level man that you think, so you'll be able to be like, okay, now you can find that. You even go out there, find somebody at a different point and work up together. Maybe together, that person might bring that other part that you're missing that's going to build you up to that person that you think you have to be before you actually attract somebody. There's things out there where I think go out there, be happy and multiply. Be happy and multiply. What's the thing that they say in, like, is it Christ? Is it like some Bible thing?
I'm not
Be
sure. I'd have to
plentiful and multiply or something. I don't know. So somebody can
yeah.
remember what it is. Like, I don't know. But yeah, yeah,
Is-
that's all I have.
So, so I had a few points to say. So the whole entitlement thing, I've always blamed things like the whole participation trophy mindset that my parents' generation pushed. I've argued with my father on this. This whole like everyone's a winner, everyone is special, everyone can have anything, and everyone can be anything, and it's like that's just not how the world operates. It's like most people are average, most people get average outcomes. Some people are slightly above, some people are below. But like people struggle to accept that they're average. That's the thing. I mean, I'm average height. I don't consider myself exceptional looking. I was earning average money till up until about a year or two ago. It's like most people are in the middle. It's like, not everyone is going to be a millionaire or not every woman is beautiful, but it's like people have been fed all this stuff. And I don't know. I just think like a certain percentage of the female population just buys into it and they take it way too seriously and it doesn't reflect reality. Um, the other thing I was going to say was, as you sort of got at, historically, a lot of these women like shared men. Like, Genghis Khan is said to have fathered over 1,000 children. Charlemagne, I think I was reading, had like 14 kids or something. You could point to Chinese emperors had concubines, sultans had harems, the king of Siam had all those wives. Like, you can go on and on. So it's like,
I think
yeah,
the
there was
record is
some.
1,400 and something. I forget who it was.
Yeah, Genghis Khan is up there, I know. But the thing is, it's like, yeah, these like Alpha, Giga, Chad, whatever. Yeah, they had all these kids, but it was like they were shared with all these women. It wasn't like the woman had a Prince Charming all to herself. That didn't happen. Um, and then the other thing too is I think a lot of these women have this sort of misleading perspective where when they're in their prime in their early 20s, they have all these options and they take it for granted. So in their mind, it's, oh, I can get all these guys that I want, but they don't realize like that's not going to continue forever. And that's where they have what they call the Epiphany Phase, where it's like these women start to hit a certain point. It's like, okay, I better get serious about finding a good partner. He may not be perfect, but, I have to think about this because I don't want to hit the wall and be alone. Um, and then the other thing I was going to say was the divorce rate, like you said, it's kind of like the death statistics where it's kind of misleading because, like you said, there are people who have multiple divorces. Like there are celebrities who all get married like 4 or 5 plus times or whatever. So it's like that skews the divorce rate. And like I was thinking about that in regards to like the death statistics because they used to say like, oh, in the old days everyone died at 30, but no, what it is that people lived older, but a lot of people died either in infancy, being born, or as children. So it's like that brings the average lifespan way down. There were still people living older, but that's you only live that if you made it through
Yeah.
those first few years, which is less common. So those statistics are a little misleading too. Yeah.
Yeah, they do skew things, and yeah, it's a weird thing that people don't really understand with some of those things.
Yeah.
I just checked. It's saying that Genghis Khan was 1,000 to 2,000 plus.
Yeah.
Mulay Islam Ibn Sharif was 868 plus. Simon Watson 800. Let's see, like Sultan Ibrahim Njoya of Cameroon. This is like in the 1890s. Yeah, this stuff doesn't really happen that much anymore. I think I saw like King Saud here was somewhere like you had like 100 or something. Yeah, so these people, yeah, Saud of Saudi Arabia. This is from 1902 to 1969. Had 106 to 115 kids. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, these people are yeah, go forth and multiply. I think go forth and multiply is the thing. So some of these people are taking it. And here for women, it's saying total of children birthed, Valentina and Fedor Vasiliev in 1765. 69. She had 69 births. How many? No, 27 births. So they have survived 67 or 69. So, okay, 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. Okay. So that
Wow.
makes some sense. Yeah. So, and that's also a genetic thing. There's certain tribes and certain people who just like twin up and things like that. That's another just thing that selects with it. So yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, most of these women with high levels, you have quadruplets and triplets and things like that in there. But yeah, that's it out there. And that might not be you. Again, you might not want to have kids. There's something going on in the United States of America right now. Roe's Wade, people are on that. But if you don't want to have kids, sex is the action that people take to have kids. It's what's been selected for, and all the other stuff is extra. But the extra is there too. You can responsibly do that extra without it. And even if you have kids, it's I don't understand. I don't understand someone to be like, I really care for this person as much as possible, and I wouldn't want, and I care for myself too. I think we're both awesome, and I wouldn't want a version of the both of us together raised in this awesomeness to be a part of. Like I don't get that. And I know there's some of the psychosis where people are like, oh, we don't bring children into this world with like global warming and all these other issues. It's not as bad as people say. History is a lot worse. Like when 1765, it was a lot worse than 1765 when Valentina and Fedor Vasiliev were popping out 69 kids. Okay, so moving on.
All right, so this section is called "You're Both Dysfunctional." So toning down the attitude, it doesn't just help in dating, but it makes marriages better too. There's Gian Gonzaga. He's a psychologist and senior scientist at eHarmony. He met his wife while working in the famous marriage lab at UCLA. He has research which involves studying 600 couples over the span of several years, focusing on relationship satisfaction and the prediction of marriage success. Happily married people believe their partners are better than the average person, even though that's statistically impossible. Gonzaga explained, we call these quote unquote positive illusions. It's not that people don't complain about their spouse or have disagreements, it's that at the end of the day, they still see them as superior to most of the people out there. In dating, he said this works the opposite way for many single people who can't seem to find the right person. Instead of viewing the people we're dating through a positive lens, we view ourselves as superior. That's why people often attribute what's lacking in a relationship to their partner. But Gonzaga says it goes both ways. We tend to be attracted to people who are similar to us in terms of emotional stability, intellect, and competence. So if you date people who seem dysfunctional, you're probably dysfunctional. If this person is neurotic, you probably are too. To attract the kind of person you have in your mind, you have to be that kind of person. It's not that all the guys you dated weren't good enough for you. People need to realize they bring their own selves into the equation. In successful relationships, Gonzaga said, couples appreciate each other's good points instead of focusing on the flaws because we all have them. A woman in Indiana tried to tell me the same thing. Laura, who had been married for 12 years, observed, we women like to imagine ourselves as goddesses who are worthy of a man's total worship and devotion, and we are incensed when he fails to give us that. Unfortunately, we get bed hair, body odor, wrinkles, thickness in the middle, and bad attitudes. We would not easily excuse such things in men, yet we expect men to overlook them in us. All right. Thoughts and comments?
Again, I'm just curious the mindset that goes here. How do they have friends? Because I am more critical about my friends than I am with like random people. Like if I see a random person post something that doesn't make sense, I'll probably let it go. But if Steven posts something, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of wrong. You should actually go back and check that thing. Personally, for myself, the more I got into self-knowledge and things like that, the more critical. I mean, I was ready. I think I just in general kind of I was depressive for some time. I was depressed for some time, and that was not a positive mind space to be. But then coming out of that and having more self-knowledge, I started holding myself to a higher standard. I was like, I am not good enough to do this, so I need to do better to do this. But when you have that kind of mindset, when it's coming from a place of knowledge, I understand I can't do this, so I'm not going to even attempt to do this. So I'm not going to be depressed that I can't do this because it's just not my bag. It's not my bag. So that's not where I go. I'm not going to be like, hey, Steven, translate this thing for me in Swahili, because he doesn't know Swahili. I'll go talk to like my mom or somebody else because they know Swahili. I don't look at Steven like you're not knowing Swahili makes you a worse friend. It's just he has different things. So when it comes to this, that's a kind of weird situation where they say if they don't know somebody, if they're in a relationship, if they're dating, they don't know that person, then they think that person is worse. And then they think they're better. So should they know themselves better than be more critical about themselves? Or is it just like again, this comes to the different things. It's a societal thing. Men and women are treated in different ways in general. We're a sexually dimorphic species. I think it's a gynocentric society. So it's tough for me to imagine just having smoke blown up your ass for all that time to the point where you really think it's tough. I guess one thing I can kind of think of was like strength-wise, but I'm still a lot stronger than most people my age. I'm a lot stronger than most people 10 years younger than me, 15 years younger than me. So I don't really know. I don't know.
Well, because for
This,
me, it's like the average relationships thing, and I've thought about this in my own mind. Because I mean, again, I come from a family of people that are happily married for a long time, and a lot of the people in my family are not exceptional people. Like, I mean, obviously, I love them, but I mean, if you look at like most of them are average looking, most of them are in average money, maybe a little above in some cases. Well, we don't have any celebrities or anything like that, but their relationships are strong. But I think that's a reflection of the fact that the standards are reasonable and that the compatibility is strong, so that's why they work well together. So it's like you don't have to have someone who's perfect, because like I think we might have brought this up in I think I brought this up in the first video, but like people who are mismatched with their partners, it's like a lightweight boxer going into a heavy league like fighting ring. He's going to get pummeled every time, and he's going to keep losing. He's going to get discouraged, and then if he says, "Well, I feel I deserve to be in this," there's a mismatch because it's like he's losing and he feels unsatisfied. Whereas if he's against people on his level, there's a shot he can win. He may lose some, may win
yeah.
some, but then when he wins, he feels gratified because there's an accomplishment in that. If he's against people that, if it were a heavyweight thrown into a lightweight league, he would win easily and it would get boring and they would lose. It'd be like, I can do better. Why do I have this? But if it's people at his level, it's like, okay, that makes sense because there's that challenge, there's still the gratification, all that. That's not a perfect comparison, but I've thought about that in my own mind. Yeah.
No, it's a good one, and even just
Yeah.
recently, I think just this weekend, we had Canelo fought like Bivol, and Canelo went
Yeah.
up like two, like a weight. He went up, I think, one or two weight classes from where he's supposed to be. And for those of y'all who don't know, with like boxing, and like normally there's like different limits, or these martial arts and combat sports, there's different weight limits, and people normally like cut down to one. Like somebody like I walk around at 200 pounds, but they'll fight at like 175 or 155 because they'll just have like a weight cut during that time. And for those of you who don't know, you can cut a lot of water weight. That's why like people go keto, like you drop like 10 pounds in the first like week because you're sweating out all the water, you're not carrying water. I've wrestled in the past, I've done keto in the past. I'm a bigger guy, so I've had that experience of where like you literally go on the scale and you've lost like 10. I think the most I did in like a day and a half was like it's like 12 pounds. It was like doing the running, wearing the sweating, the stuff. Like the water just goes off me. But these boxers, they'll actually work down and get cut. Like walking around regular kind of life, they'll be at about 25% body fat, 20 to 25%. When they actually box, when they actually fight in the UFC or something, they'll drop down over like a whole camp for like that's 6 months, like a year. Some of the camps are looking longer. They'll drop down to, or some camps are a lot shorter, but they'll drop down to about 8% body fat. They'll just be super lean. So this is a thing that they can actually do with these things. And when you fight out, when Canelo goes higher and he's beaten by somebody like Bivol, people don't look at it like, oh, no, Canelo's trash now. Because you understand the difference between somebody who's actually walking around. Because if Canelo's walking around, going in his walking around, so that guy's cutting down also from a different height, or he's just used to doing that. So the person has a longer frame. There's all these things to go into it. So yeah, I think just being practical and having a general understanding of where you're at on the thing is not a negative thing to do. And once you have that good estimation of yourself, you become more realistic about your
Well,
goals and your
you're more
achievements.
realistic, and Samuel's talked about this too. It's like you don't feel contempt for certain people because if you think like with some of these women, oh, I'm better than all these guys, but are you really? And then it's like the guys you want are going to write you off for a list of reasons, then the guys that would be suitable you hold in contempt, and that's why there's that mismatch. Whereas
Yeah,
if you're more humble, you'd have a little more respect for these guys, maybe give them a chance. Maybe some of them you'd like, some you wouldn't, but maybe you'd realize, hey, maybe if you focus on those right things and are a little more humble, I think you'd be a lot happier in the long run. Instead of like, that one woman I know chasing these guys that have no interest and passing up guys that are interested. It's like there's an obvious mismatch, either way.
and that contempt also does it starts growing you because you start saying what's wrong with me. Like I
Yeah.
like even if you might say it's something wrong with them, it's a quick switch to go to like I failed at actually attracting these people. It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So next section. This is called "I Have to Talk About Sex in the City." So I know it's become such a cliche to talk about Sex in the City. I almost don't want to bring it up, but I can't resist because it relates to the attitude of entitlement. On the one hand, the movie made a huge deal when the media made a huge deal when the movie based on the successful book and series earned nearly 200 million in the US alone because it showed that audiences would pay to see strong women on the big screen. But it also showed something else, that we can't seem to tell the difference between strong and self-centered. In case you were one of the few single women who missed the movie, Samantha tells her wonderful boyfriend who stood by her through breast cancer that she's leaving him because I love you, but I love myself more, and the entire audience cheered. Now, this was a boyfriend who was loving, loyal, and hot, and put up with her demands and went through cancer with her, and she decided to leave because she's in love with herself. And this was supposed to be empowering. Reverse the genders. Let's say like she stuck with him through prostate cancer and he bailed. I'm betting the entire audience would have booed and called the guy a total ass. Samantha isn't the only one. Carrie is a nightmare bridezilla who's outraged when her fiance says he'd be happy to marry her at City Hall. He says he cares not about a wedding day, but about being with her every day. So what does she do? She and her friends go off to Mexico on her would-be honeymoon, and guess what? Complain about men. Her circus of a wedding day didn't go as planned. Now she's on her honeymoon without her beloved husband to be. Is this quote unquote strong or quote unquote spoiled? The TV series wasn't much different. Each week the characters would dissect various men. There was no room for imperfection. If the guy also didn't feel his girlfriend was perfect, well, obviously she should dump him. If you're not totally in love with me and crazy about me, Carrie once told Big, and if you don't think I'm the most beautiful woman you've seen in your life, then I think I should leave. Any rational adult knows that back on planet Earth, few men think the woman they're with is the most beautiful person they've seen in their life, and vice versa. Like the Sex and the City gals, many women expect men to fawn over them as though they're queens. That's precisely why these otherwise attractive heroines seem to have everything but the man. They treated love like 16-year-old sophomores do, forgetting that 16-year-old girls aren't exactly ready for marriage. Do you really think there are a lot of women out there like Carrie? My friend Elizabeth, a single 31-year-old editor in North Carolina, asked me. Before I could reply, she went on to describe a guy who would write her sweet notes and who she was sort of falling for through his writing. He listens attentively and asks me a lot of questions about my life, which I find most guys are not good about doing. He also responds to all emails and texts quickly and wittily. He seeks out cool concerts for us to go to. He told me what I was doing, exactly what I was looking for. What girl doesn't want to hear that? But she continued, at the same time, he just seems kind of awkward with me, and his place is plastered with Tar Heel stuff. It seems juvenile. It's like a high school boys' room minus the pinups. It feels like the sports equivalent, Tar Heels porn. He doesn't go hiking. He doesn't speak a foreign language. None of these things seem to fit my idea of the guy I wanted. Am I that girl? And okay, thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Again, these are just the things that these are the blinders that we have. I'm sure there's still a few things I know that I'd be like, okay, I need to work on this design, I need to do this art, I need to get this thing done. And every morning I wake up and it just sits there, and gets to the day like, oh man, I should have done this in the past. And or I see somebody else come up with a similar idea. I'm like, oh, why didn't I do that before? And then it happens again. So I understand there's things to work through. I'm like, okay, why doesn't somebody see this? Why doesn't somebody do this? And I understand there's things in my life where I am at that point where someone's like, oh, if I could draw like you, I would do this. Like I remember one of the things back in high school, actually was at a wrestling meet, talking about like the weight classes and things. Had one of my friends who was like he's like 250, and I was heavyweight at the time. I was also like, before senior year, I didn't get to the point where I had to like can't wait to get down to like under 275, just like going up. But anyway, so we're talking to this guy, and this guy was like, if I was you, I would be playing in the NFL. Like I would be trying to do this and this. And it was because he was like a lot shorter than I can. He definitely put in a lot of effort, but he had certain limitations. He was shorter, he had a different frame and things like this. But then I was like, if you were me, you'd also be able to draw, and then you'd have had the experience of freshman year, doing something again and cracking your growth plate, and then you weren't able to actually draw anymore, and you really like drawing, and then that kind of like got you like, should I really be playing sports, or should I really there's other things. You also have the background that I had where you traveled around, so you're thinking about other things while people are thinking about playing football. You're like, I'm maybe going to be living in America. I don't mind living in this other country. You're like, who am I actually going to be? So there's other things you would actually have with that thing. So I don't just want to be that person to say, why don't these people see this? But why don't those people see this? Like, how could she actually just ask that and then just go back and actually say the things like that? Like, what is it? Why can't you just bring it up? Like, hey, I know this language. Do you mind actually learning this language together? Or like in that situation, she'd be like, okay, he doesn't know a foreign language. You might know one. There might be a foreign language you wanted to learn. And you're like, hey, can we learn this language together? That would be like your thing. And it's like, if it's the poster type of situation, like, do you add some, like, it's, what is that? Like those things, like, are those really things people are deciding these, like, what is your life just so secure that everything else is completely kosher, completely cush, that you're just like, find fault with somebody's Tario poster. It's like, what the? It's so weird.
Well, because like that line about, if you don't think I'm the most beautiful woman in the world, and like I was thinking about this in my own relationship, like Christine is very harsh on her own appearance. Like she'll say things like, oh, I'm not beautiful. My sister-in-law is prettier than me and all this. And like some could say that it kind of goes into insecurity, but I also respect the humility because I've known like moderately attractive women who will be like, I'm beautiful, I'm perfect. Oh, you want this, but you can't have it. And like that's just a huge like turn off for me. Like I meet women or even people in general who are just like that. No, I shut off completely. Um, and Sex and the City, I'm glad that she brings it up because like I've had this debate with different people over the years. Have people say like, "Oh, it's just a TV show. What's the big deal?" But I'm like, this stuff does influence popular culture. I mean,
Yeah.
we frequently talk about like how many people got their news from Jon Stewart, even though that was quote unquote just comedy. I mean, how many women have I seen? Oh, I'm going to live as this Sex and the City lifestyle. Oh, I'm the Samantha of my friends group. It's like this stuff has had an impact, whether you like it or not. I mean, again, you could argue, okay, people choose to buy into all that stuff and live their lives unrealistically, but it has had an impact. Again, you can't deny that. And one of the things I wanted to bring up in relation to this, and some of the manosphere guys have talked about this too, is like, don't live your lives by what celebrities do, because if you look at like the way that people actually live their lives versus like the lifestyle they're selling, like it never really matches up. Like my mom used to watch Sex and the City a lot, and I know like, I saw a bit of it. I mean, I didn't watch it regularly, but I saw some episodes here and there. And like Carrie has like all these boyfriends throughout the series, but in real life, she married Matthew Broderick. I think I was reading in '97. They've been married the whole time, and they're on a show on Broadway together. I know some people who've seen them in restaurants together. Like, as far as we know, they have a stable, healthy marriage. I mean, again, who knows what goes on behind the scenes, but it's like she's living a monogamous, stable life, and like she has at least one or a few kids. Like I know her baby at the time actually showed up as a baby on the show. Like there are things like that. So it's like she's glorifying that lifestyle, but in her own life, it's a stable monogamous life. And then Cardi B, it's the same thing. Like, yeah, she was a stripper, but like, she has that song, WAP, and she sings in it, I ain't got to cook, I don't got to clean, I got this ring. But then like her husband recorded footage of her cooking and cleaning around the house, and she's like, yeah, I do all this. And, she's like, they were going to divorce. She's like, no, we decided to work it out. Like, I want a traditional family life for my kids. She said like, well, like she won't let her daughter listen to her music. So it's like, on the one hand, they're selling and they're glorifying a certain lifestyle, but if you look at the way that people actually live, it doesn't reflect that. So it's like you have to ask, like, do these people actually believe what they're portraying, or is this just trying to sell you something or play a role or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing people don't really understand with that kind of entertainment thing. But people understand the thing. Otherwise, there wouldn't be these grand movements to have women empowerment, to have women being shown this, to have diversity represented in these places, because they do understand there is an aspect of that. It's not that big for me, but I also understand that's more from my background of just being dissociated from these collectivist type of things, because I was moving from different cultures, so I had to like relearn things. So I wasn't like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this from the way people who look like me happen to do this, because I'm like, you might look like me, but you don't think at all like me. So that was drilled into my mind very early. But with some people, there's a lot of people out there who truly, unless they see a black person playing basketball, maybe they would never consider, as a black person, I can play basketball professionally. I don't know. It's weird, but it works. Women like, we need more empowerment. We need to tell women they can do this. So they understand this aspect of it. Then you say, okay, things like Sex and the City are telling women certain, no, that's not it. I mean, yeah, it is kind of it. But they also got to understand this is a job for these people. These people are reading scripts. These people are putting things like, if somebody's like, I own a McDonald's, I run a McDonald's, you don't sit there and think, yeah, this person must eat McDonald's every day. Nobody really thinks that.
No.
Nobody's like, oh yeah, Philip Morris, they have the tobacco companies, they must be smoking 2 packs a day in their board meetings. It's just cigarettes. Nobody really thinks that. People are like, oh, this is someone who does like, this is a plastic surgery person. Oh, they must just have women around them with just like big tits and like this, and like they're doing, no, some of those people are just like, I'll never touch that stuff myself. But why is it when it comes to certain characters, people are like, yeah, that must be it. Nobody really thinks Tom Cruise is out there like Mission Impossible and all his life and things like that. They understand these different things. But with these women, they make these connections to these characters in that kind of way. It's a weird type of situation.
Because you could argue like Kim Cattrall kind of does that, because like with her, like I know like with Sarah Jessica Parker, she said she wouldn't appear nude on the show and things like that. But Kim Cattrall like wrote a book about sex like with her husband at the time and like was happy to appear naked and all that. So you can see a little bit of that, but it's like it's still a role she's playing, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it does differ with some people. Some people will be the character, and some people mold the character. Like you see, like someone like Johnny Depp right now having his issues with Amber Heard, and you can see like he's become Jack Sparrow. Like he molded that character around him. Like you can't really like recast that position because
No.
it's not really the same. But he's not like Jack Sparrow. You can see the issues that he's had at home. I guess Jack Sparrow did also have issues, kind of a drunk, kind of things like that. So there are some aspects of that that are kind of it. But then now you look at someone like Amber Heard, who's generally liked. She became the ACLU, like women's representative for like women's issues and things like that, because she came from a background of being generally liked in the industry and things like, at least publicly, to the point where, oh, she was actually hurt, let's put her in this position. And then it turns out that she's had a bunch of demons in her life as well, and it's tougher. Like I can understand some of the struggles because someone like with her, even these wealthy men like the Will Smiths of the world and this like this with all this like success, but then you look at the inverse of somebody like Amber Heard. It's like objectively, you just look at her even now in her current state in the court with her issues. There's something transfixing about her face, and I just looked in the like back in 2016 with that Greek golden ratio, she was found to have like.
Yeah.
99.9%. It was like one of the highest scores ever because her face is just like draw you in. So I'm sure, despite all the issues and struggles she had in her childhood, there was tons of men just constantly just giving her
Yeah.
those things, like reinforcing the negative aspects that she had and not challenging her. That it can be a mess. And when you look at the people in life, it's scripted. There's a reason these people work their way out of that. There's this typical things you can't really, in general, show people the normal, realistic results of acting in certain ways in TV because it's imaginary. So people think I can also get away with that crap, but you don't have a script writer. You don't have extras. You don't have somebody coming reading the lines that are supposed to fit your character. You might not be the main story in whatever's going on at any given time. Like, yeah, it's, I mean, main character, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember like there was a plot line too in Sex and the City where it was like she cheated on Aiden with Mr. Big or whatever, and then like Aiden found out and gave her another chance, but she's like, oh, I want to still talk to him and I want him to be able to call here and whatever, and he was like unhappy about it, and she's like, no, this is non-negotiable, this is going to happen. Then he stayed with her a bit longer and eventually broke up, but it's like, where in real life does that sort of thing happen? It's like, yeah.
Where does it happen successfully? I think that's
Yeah,
thing.
I guess that's a better way to put it. Like, yeah, people do stuff like that, but how long does that relationship last after that? Because it's like,
Yeah, that actually seems almost realistic that they actually break up after, because we see.
What I'm saying, I've known a lot of people that like they catch their partner cheating once, that's it. And with that, it was like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, if you want, you can stay in touch with him, even though I caught you cheating. And it's like that's being very forgiving. And then eventually,
that's
it's like, all
beyond
right,
the pale. Yeah,
and then she like cried when he broke up with her. But it's like, well, what did you expect? I mean, you cheated. Yeah, it's like, yeah,
yeah.
all right,
Hmm.
all right. This next section is called grounds for dismissal. Maybe a lot of us are. My friend Mark, a divorced dad, sent me an email exchange he had with Melanie, a never married woman he met online. They seemed to click, so he and Melanie were making plans to meet in person. So, Melanie, Mark, what about tomorrow, Saturday at 11? Works for me. Meet you in front of Aroma. I've lost interest. You were dismissed. Seriously, what happened? Melanie, didn't hear from you till almost the next day, indicating that I was not a priority. That does not work for me. So, Mark, well, I guess it'll teach me for not having a BlackBerry and being away from my computer from noon till late night, attending my son's graduation ceremony and dinner with him afterward in Irvine. Because when you don't respond to someone's email within a few hours, it could possibly be because you're away from your computer, got into an accident, or on a trip someplace, attending an important event. The only possible reason that you placed the one who's emailed you into a low priority status. Thank you for that insight that only jumping to conclusions can provide. Melanie, no response. I had asked Mark if he had heard from Melanie again. A few days later, he said she apologized and said she had been under stress and perhaps overreacted, but still didn't want to meet. According to Melanie's email, the momentum was lost. Mark said this kind of self-centeredness was common. There's also this childless woman I was dating who gave me an ultimatum. I could either accept my children's invitation to a Passover Seder with them at their place or be with her relatives on Passover. If I accepted my children's invitation, I could forget about continuing the relationship with her. What did he decide? You'll be stunned to know that she and I are not together anymore, he said dryly. I asked other women what they thought of Mark's email exchange with Melanie and the ultimatum from Mark's former girlfriend, words like insane, inflexible, and selfish came up. Still, we had to admit that in a twisted way, we could understand why these women felt shafted. A dream guy wouldn't leave the woman waiting for her by email for 9 hours. A dream guy would want to be with his beloved on a holiday more than with anyone else. It's okay, of course, for a woman to prioritize her children over her boyfriend, and if he requested otherwise, he'd be considered selfish. The problem is a dream guy doesn't exist precisely because we've dreamed him up. And even if he did, is this really the guy we'd want to be with? A guy who doesn't have a life except for us? A guy who doesn't spend the holidays with his own children? Of course not. But imagine the conversation that Melanie and the Passover chick, as she became to be known, had with their girlfriends about why it was necessary to dump Mark. What a jerk, they probably said as their friends nodded and sipped their wine at yet another all-girl bar night where they searched for eligible men. Okay, thoughts and comments?
Yeah, again, now this goes more, again, the movies and watching these things, and this has influenced people too. Things like pornography, things like this, they influence people's expectations of what to get from other people. Like, you watch a movie, sure, you look at the romance, again, that's scripted. It has the background music, it has the lighting, it has the build up to it, it has, everything seems to be done in a certain way where you think, okay, the whole, like, in a making TV shows, you're making a movie, making a show, part of the reason you won't have somebody actually just do a phone call, they'll send an email or something, and then later on the man will respond to the email, responds to the text, is because if you actually have them have the conversation immediately, whatever that email was, like on the phone, they actually pick up the phone and call somebody, that could be like 5-10 minutes of the actual runtime of the movie, them talking about what's in there, instead of them just saying, I sent you an email, and then the person coming back to and reacting to whatever was in the email. But if you're living in the actual world and you feel like you want some actual immediate actual reaction from the person, pick up the phone and call them. Like, then you'll actually be able to get the response immediately. Like, this whole, like, I'm going to send you an email and test you out. These games people play, it's frustrating. It's frustrating as heck.
Well, regarding that point too, I liked what they said in here about how like the dream guy like it doesn't really make sense because on the one hand, a lot of these women are like, oh, I want the guy to be devoted, loyal to me. But it's also like women don't want clingy men. And I've learned this the hard way where like if you focus on the woman and talk to her all the time, she'll lose interest because it's like this guy has nothing going on in his life. So he's basically using me to fill a void. Like that's how it usually comes across. And I recently talked to Christine a bit about this and I was saying like how I like our kind of arrangement because it's like we don't live together, but we stay together sometimes. But what it is she works later. But what it is she'll stay with me and then like she'll sleep. And then like I'll go to the gym, sometimes talk to you or whoever. And then like we go out later, she'll go back to work. So it's like we see each other, but we're not like together all the time. Cause I told her and like my parents have said similar, like if you're just with your partner all the time, you're going to go nuts. Like my parents worked in the same organization, but like they worked in separate houses because it's like, do you really want to go to work, deal with problems, come home, see the same person again? It's like, you know, it's nice to have that kind of breakup where it's like, you know, you appreciate the time with them more because like, okay, you go to work, you hopefully have a good time, you spend time with your coworkers, your friends, and you go home, spend time with your partner. But it's like, do you really want to be with the other person around the clock? I mean, I don't know. I've never really like for me, it's like, I mean, I love my girlfriend obviously, but it's like, you know, I mean, I have friends, I have hobbies. It's like, I don't want someone to just be around all the time. You know?
Yeah, that one, I guess it's completely depends on the situation. Because some people are like, yeah, I'm okay with like long distance relationships where I don't even see the person. Like I know some people who are seem to be lovingly married for quite some
Yeah.
time, and right now they work in like international organizations. One of them is in like somewhere in Europe. One of them is somewhere in southern Africa. Like, and they see each other like they spend maybe a month total a year living in the same place. Like they maybe come from vacation, but it's just how they live, and
Yeah.
they raise kids. The kids are also in different countries and things like this. So it's something that works with different people, and that's built up. I think after, I think when they had the kids and things like that, they were together in the same home. Then they went out. I think some of those things will morph. It depends on what you're doing together, because maybe you and Christine will eventually start building up things that both of you are doing together that you'll be like, okay, we're okay. Like, I don't think you'd completely be against spending more time together, but
Yeah.
you're okay with not, because there's still things that you're still allowed to be yourself. And if you're an active
Yeah.
person, you still appreciate that that person is doing these things that play a part of who they are. So yeah, I mean, that one is,
Yeah,
it
because
depends.
I think it's sort of a paradox with women, like, because that's kind of the point that's being laid out here. Like, on the one hand, oh, I want to be with the guy all the time, but then if they are, they complain, oh, he's too clingy or he doesn't have anything going on, and it's like, you can't have it both ways, because there is the other extreme, and they talk about this later. Like, some of these women want these high earning men, but then they complain, oh, he's never around. But it's like, if he's a CEO, executive, doctor, whatever, that's the reality. Like, especially if he's like a corporate guy, he's probably going to travel a lot. You probably
Yeah.
won't see him. You'll live in a nice house, you'll live a good life, but you won't see your husband. Then if you marry a mid-level guy, he'll make decent money, but then, like, not exceptional money, but he'll be around more. So you have to sort of weigh those trade-offs either way. And yeah.
There could be an aspect here where there's a difference between doing things together versus somebody relying on you to do things. Somebody's like
Yeah.
waiting for you to do things so they can follow what you do. That's one thing. But then if you're like working together towards something, like if you open a business together and you're both working at the business, I don't think it's that negative thing because you're both doing it. There's both things, even within that thing, there's things that you would do independently, even if that person
Yeah.
isn't actually there with you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because like, well, the other example I thought of was in high school. I was friends with this guy, and his girlfriend broke up with him because he was too clingy, basically. And I remember, like, I talked to her later about it, and she was saying how she loved my friend and all, but the issue was, like, with her, she had different social circles. Like, she was one of those, like, oh, I don't have friends, but was out with like different people every night. She had different friends she'd hang out with, but like, he just wanted to be with her all the time because he was a very, like, kind of a loner, had a few friends, but not many. And like, he just wanted to be with her all the time. And she basically said, like, look, I like spending time with you, but it's like, I have other things I want to do too. But he just wanted to be around her all the time. So it's like, I can see where that can get annoying too, because it's like, there's so much time in the day, and it's like, you still have your other friends, you still have other interests. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So this is one more section. It's called Yes, He's With Her. Melanie may seem extreme, but many of us carry around this sense of entitlement in dating and don't realize it. One woman who has been married for 5 years told me an interesting story. When she was single, Danielle went to a married friend's dinner party. She was seated next to a guy she liked talking to very much, only to learn that the woman on the right was his fiance. The woman was less attractive, charming, and witty than Danielle was. I believe this. Danielle's very attractive, charming, and witty. After everyone left, Danielle was hanging out with her friend who had given her the party and complained she was tired of meeting men who were already taken. She couldn't understand why all these other men managed to end up with great guys, but she was alone. What do they have that I don't? She asked about the woman engaged. Without missing a beat, her friend shot back two things. One, compassion, and two, his love. Compassion, her friend said, is what leads to love. Her friend had seen Danielle get excited about guys over the years, like she was about that night's dinner party, yes, only to find something quote unquote wrong with him a month or a year later. That was a wake up call for Danielle, who realized right then if she continued to judge potential mates and always finding them wanting, she would end up alone. The next guy she dated, she ended up marrying. After that conversation, I approached my next relationship completely differently. I focused on appreciating what I liked about him and being compassionate about things I thought were wrong. And I realized I hadn't been appreciative of my boyfriends in the past. Danielle admitted that she hadn't been aware of how her sense of entitlement affected her relationships. I used to think I'm just not getting what I want and break up with the guy. Then I realized when I met my husband that if I went in with this attitude instead of expecting things from him instead of appreciating who he was, I would be sabotaging myself. I made a conscious decision to feel pleased by what he offered to the relationship instead of complaining about what he didn't. And I realized that I had no right to complain about something if I wasn't giving it in return. He said to me one day, I like being romantic, but I don't see why I have to be exclusively in charge of romance in this relationship. And I realized that I expected all the romance to come from him. Then maybe it would be nice if it went both ways, you know? Dr. Broder explained too often in dating, we expect to be given a lot of things from men: constant compliments, vacations, meals, 24/7 emotional support, romantic gestures, and those men who don't meet our standards in any of these departments get the boot. One woman I spoke to broke up with a guy because she felt that her boyfriend didn't call her and check in enough during the day. Never mind that he was a doctor, which made it very difficult to break away. She wanted someone who was more available. The funny thing is, she thought the problem was that he needed to change. It never occurred to her that she might need to become a little more understanding. It never occurred to her that she might actually be happier and grow as a person if she made some changes. A barber in Montana told me this attitude is turning men off. I have boatloads of eligible men as clients, but many of them have told me they're ready to write off dating entirely. They say that the modern American woman brings nothing to the relationship except this deep-seated hunger for him to be everything unless something better comes along. Or as a 29-year-old single dentist in Atlanta put it, women are always asking where are all the good guys, and I say you can't see them with your nose in the air. And I thought of all the conversations I had with my single friends over the years about how there weren't enough good men out there. But now I was starting to discover something else. Maybe there were plenty of good men, but we were turning them off with our over the top expectations. Maybe we needed to get over ourselves. It's a humbling realization, but I knew it was true. I needed to get over myself too. I seemed to be suffering from this modern malady. It seemed clear that if I wanted to meet someone, I'd have to stop complaining about the men who were out there and start making better choices. But how? Okay, that's the end of the chapter, and that's also the end of part 2.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I just thought of while doing that. Like if you find yourself you're in a relationship, just think about the relationship that you're in. If you're in one, or if you've been in some, just think about when they broke up, or if the person broke up with you, or if you broke up with them, and just think about it. If you're in that relationship because of the X that person does for you, rather than the Y that person makes you want to do for them, realize that person can also do those X things for other people. Like if you're like, I really like that this person takes me on trips. I really like that this person sends me these. I really like that this person calls and when I'm with this. That person can go on trips with other people, can send things to other people, can call and be interested to other people. But if you're like, I really like how this person makes me want to do this for this person, makes me want to check in with this person. I really like how this person makes me want to know exactly where he's going to be in this thing. So when you think about those things, if that's your mindset in it, then chances are you're appreciating what that person makes you, not what that person does for you, if that makes any sense and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you're like a sports thing, like if you're in a sports team and you're like, I appreciate the salary this person gives me, instead of like, I appreciate that when I'm with this team, it makes you want to play like so much better. If you're someone who's like, I just appreciate getting the salary and you don't really like have the drive to actually be a better player, there's a good chance that team's going to like put you off and get somebody else in that position that's more like pushed to actually do something. So I think that's something to kind of think of when you're looking at these situations.
Yeah, and I see this in my own parents' relationship too, where like my mom will complain about certain things with my dad, but then she'll say like, "Look, your father's very caring. Your father does this. Your father is patient about this." Like, oh, like she does appreciate all his strengths too. And my father's very good on that in general. Like, he doesn't really complain about my mother, but I'm saying like he appreciates when people do things and all this. Like, again, it's that attitude she was saying of like you start at the bottom and say, okay, what are the strengths they have, instead of just like, okay, here are all the things I want and what don't they deliver. And I admit I used to think more like that too, but then you realize, one, how much do you bring to the table, and again, they can easily do the same thing to you.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know. See, that was part 2.
Yep.
Was the what and
Chapter
why? So
9,
that was
part
like,
2.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So how many more parts are there?
I want to say I think there's 5 parts in total.
Okay. Yeah, but as we've talked about with these kind of series, some of the things when we get to the later parts, we don't really have as much to talk about since we've touched on many of the topics
Yeah.
in the previous parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but this is a thing out there, and as we've mentioned, there are a lot of people who are out there who want relationships. We've talked about this conversation series is for people who want relationships. If you're not
Yep.
somebody that wants one, then why you listen? I mean, you can still listen. It's still kind of interesting to understand why people want them, but it's going to hit you in a different way. You're probably not going to be looking. But then, what is a relationship to you? What is romance to you? How participate are you? How participant are you in it? If you want to find somebody who is on those traditional roles completely, where you are completely a passive part of the actual relationship, there's men out there who are more than willing to actually do that. It might not be 90% of the men out there. So you might be looking at 90% of the desirable men to you. From the desirable men to you, they might actually only be like 2 or 3 that would be willing to just lavish you constantly with certain things in a certain location. So it's just get to know why you want certain things. Get to understand if you can actually afford, if you can actually in the sexual marketplace, in the relationship marketplace, afford that asking price for those things. Like if, for example, if you're in the adult mentality required, if you like, this is a simple thing, if you are somebody who you're like, I have this particular position that I like doing sexually that involves maybe being lifted by the person who you're having intercourse with, if you're like 5'1", 120 pounds, you could probably date 75% of the men out there and be able to have that sexual position. If you were 5'6", 5'7", 250 to 300 pounds, that's going to reduce the amount of men that can, even if they wanted to, that could do that position involving lifting you. So that's something that's something that's objective, like gravity. That's a thing. But then those similar things also apply on other parts of the relationship. If you have certain wants and demands, the amount of men who are going to fit and be able to actually do that with you as the person that you are shrinks. But if you have certain that are more general, you get to have a wider range of people. That's just something to be aware. We're not saying don't have standards. Have realistic standards and understand that certain standards are going to be extremely limiting. If I was like, if I thought 100% I have to marry the most beautiful woman in the world, but the most beautiful woman in the world is a 6'3", green-eyed, natural green eyes, freckles, Japanese Nipponese woman that happens to be a redhead. There's probably been like one woman like that in the last 100 years ever, or like alive. So I'm not going to find that person. So
No.
I can have standards, but if that's my standard, I shouldn't complain that how come there's no women like that on OkCupid.
Yeah, because
yeah.
Yeah, because again, to bring up that Sex in the City line, like what I was saying about my relationship, and it's like I mean, obviously I do find Christine attractive, but like do I think she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen? Number one, no, but I do find her attractive. Number two, that's not a requirement. Like that's like if I'm thinking long term, potential wife, mother, all that, like that's not something I place as the number one priority because looks fade. There's adaptation, which I think we'll get into in a later section. Like, it's like, yeah, you can have this like visualized perfect person, like she says, a dream person, but that's just it. It's a dream. It's like, does this reflect the reality?
Yeah, and people also understand this effect in life in general. Most people will have certain things. Maybe you have a childhood like security blanket, or you have like a car that you've been through. It's kind of like a beat down car, but you have all these memories in the car. That car, it's not a Ferrari. It's not like it's not a McLaren, but that Honda Civic, like that 95 Honda Civic, might have those memories that endears you to that a lot more because of the experiences that you've had with that. There's certain foods and dishes that you go home, that mom's like recipe, and it's just put on a plate. It's very hearty. It's not like a 5-star Michelin star. You can check out our other series, Dish Your Dish, where we talk about foods and things like that. It's not like one of those like top level type of things. Everything's put on the plate in the perfect ways, hit your mouth with melt and have the different mouth feels. But there's something loving and caring about that appeals in a different way. You're not looking for you're not there as a Michelin car like, where's the white tablecloth, Mom? How come you haven't put this food in the same way? How come this doesn't come at this time? Like, this is a little chart. Like, you don't go to that point because that's not the purpose that you have in there. And I think with relationships, if you have those other things in there, you start to, that the container of that person, that mind, that soul actually ends up endearing itself on you a lot more than if it's just like somebody who's physically attractive. Because as Stephen said, with time, that will actually go away, regardless of all the, like that plastic surgeon I was talking about, the top guy who's doing all the, regardless of how many times I don't know.
Well,
I'm just thinking about some of the plastic surgery I see of you. I'm like, what are you doing to yourself? Don't you know we can see that? Like, what is going on? Like,
well, again, we'll discuss it more in a later chapter, but what I touched on was adaptation. It's the idea that the effects of things wear off over time. So even if you were to get with a really good looking person and they were to stay that way for a while, you're not going to be blown away by their looks every day. And it's like, and again, and you think about this in regards to anything else, like you start a new job, you may be all excited, but then you get settled in, it becomes part of your routine. You move somewhere, oh, my new home, all this, then it becomes, the background, etc. So it's like, and I think what it is a lot of people conflate that initial excitement for substance and they think that's just going to last. Then when that wears off, oh, it got boring. And then they look for something else and they keep thinking they can keep reclaiming that. But it's just each time you're just getting that initial excitement. It's not anything long term. Yeah.
So I think that's it.
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
So guys, gals, and everybody else in between, thank y'all very much for listening to us in this series. We shall be back for more. By the time you listen to this, there's already going to be 7 parts out, so you can go back and check out those. And we have a bunch of other content that we've recorded and conversations and a bunch of other things we have planned coming for the future as we continue this little experiment and conversation that we had. Still soon. By the time this goes out, it might be up already, but this is something that I keep saying we're going to talk about. We're talking about finding a community where we can have more interaction and participation, and maybe look into doing like live streams of these. So when we're actually recording some of these, some people might be able to come in and give some input, or maybe like after we're done with the conversation, maybe we have like a time where we talk a bit with whoever's in that community. We'll figure something out as time works with the both of us. Right now, I'm in Nairobi, he's in New York City. We work around these different things, but it's okay. I think we both are interested enough in this content, and we're not going to run out of stuff to talk about. I have these conversations with Stephen, whether we're on this recording or not. So we just appreciate y'all out there. Appreciate Stephen for taking the time. And anything else you want to say?
No, that's it. I think another good discussion.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Wewe hapa nitamjulia hewa, wacha hiyo kwanza iishe.